So this video is quite a bit different than the normal type of content that I make, but I really love talking about technology. So in the comments, you can let me know if this sort of stuff is something you want to see more of in the future, or if you want me to really just stick to design tutorials and more directly design related stuff. But the main point of this video is about building your own PC for design, and more specifically, what parts to pick when you're doing that. So I've went ahead and built a very powerful iMac, 27-inch iMac with an i7 processor, 16 gigs of RAM, a nice big hard drive, and the parts I'm going to show in the video will show you how to build your own PC for about $1,800. That is a very close match to this almost $2,800 iMac. And that $1,800 also includes stuff like the operating system, a monitor, mouse and keyboard, pretty much everything you'd need to get going. So if you already have some stuff like a nice monitor, a mouse and keyboard, those sorts of things, that cost will be even lower. And also, before I really get going on this, I don't want this to devolve into some Apple versus PC argument. That's not really the point of this video. Apple makes really good, high quality products that service the design industry really well. There's a reason that they're really a staple in a lot of design firms, and it's because they work well out of the box. They look, in my opinion, really great, and they just let you go in there, get the job done. They're very streamlined for that purpose. But if you're on a budget and you want a very powerful computer, Apple really isn't the way to go because cost versus performance is pretty bad on an Apple, at least in comparison to a PC, and also for upgradability. An iMac is essentially a laptop that's flipped up with a big old screen on the front, which makes them very hard to upgrade for anything past the RAM. So if you ever want to upgrade your video card or your processor, that's a huge pain if it's even possible on an iMac, whereas if you build your own PC, it's a relatively simple thing to do if you know how to actually go in there and do it. And if you don't know how to build your own PC, I'm not going to cover that in this video, but there are some very, very nice step-by-step guides of how to build your own PC. There's channels on YouTube like Linus Tech Tips, as well as I think Newegg has some videos of how to build your own PC that I suggest you watch if you're doing this for the first time, or better yet, if you have a friend that knows how to build a PC, I'm sure they'd be happy to sit down with you and just put it together with you and show you what they're doing. An average PC build can take under an hour if that person is really good at what they're doing, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's actually a pretty straightforward process that just sounds a whole lot more complicated than it actually is. So here's our goal: to match this $2,800 iMac. It's a 27-inch iMac, beautiful screen, i7 processor, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 3TB Fusion drive. So I've got 12 different parts listed, and I will list all these parts in the description that I think will do a pretty nice job of creating a comparable computer to go up against this iMac. So first up here is the case, and I picked a pretty cheap case here, and as I go through these options, there are certain areas where you could spend more or less money, and I'll let you know which of these areas are as I go through them. So the case is one where you could spend a whole lot more money if you want to. This case is from NZXT, and it's called the Source 210 Elite, and it comes in either black or white as shown right here on Amazon, and I'll place a link in the description for this. But I picked this case because number one, it's very cost effective at $60. That's pretty darn cheap. And NZXT makes really high quality cases for the money. They do a good job with cable management. It's just a solid starting point for what we're looking to do here. So this is the case I picked. If you're looking for another case that's maybe a little bit more expensive, there are some higher end case manufacturers like Lian Li that make really great cases, but they can also be well past the $100 mark up to the $200 mark. So this is just a good starter case to get the job done. Next up we have the power supply, and the power supply is what powers your entire computer. For a computer, this 430 watt power supply will be plenty big enough. It's very cheap at $42, and it is 80 plus certified, which means it's a very power efficient power supply. So really not a whole lot more to cover here. It's just a nice high quality power supply to power our computer. As far as the motherboard, I picked an Asus motherboard. Asus makes really great motherboards, and I picked this one in particular because if you look at the back side right here, it has a whole bunch of USB ports on the back, which comes in really handy when you're plugging a bunch of stuff in. For example, I do lots of video and audio work where I tend to use a lot of USB ports, and this one has 2 USB 2.0 ports as well as 4 USB 3.0 ports. So that's a really big plus when you're plugging in a bunch of stuff in your computer. You really want those slots to have that. And also because this particular motherboard covers the processor that I want to use. And I picked a really beastly processor for this computer. So right here is the processor that I picked. It's an i7 4790K. And if I look at the Apple page, it's showing the processor is an i7 with a turbo boost up to 3.9 gigahertz, and it's 3.5 gigahertz standard, and it's a quad core. So the processor I picked right here is also a quad core, but this one is much faster. So the stock speed is 4 gigahertz instead of 3.5, and the turbo boost speed, which is what automatically goes goes up as it needs it is 4.4 instead of 3.9. This processor really will crush the processor that's inside this 27-inch iMac, and a lot of that is because in a desktop PC there's a lot more room for cooling. It's a lot easier to keep the parts cool, and in processors, a cool running processor is really everything. So in a very cramped and tight space like the iMac that doesn't have a whole lot of room for cooling, it's really hard to get a processor in there running really fast without overheating it, which will actually cause it to slow down. So this way you're actually working with a much more powerful processor, but this is a very expensive processor. If you want to save roughly $100, you can go down to an i5 instead of an i7. You'll basically lose hyperthreading, which will slow down programs like Photoshop or Premiere. So if you do a lot of really intense, in-depth work, I really would recommend an i7, but you can jump down to an i5 if you want a cheaper alternative. i5s are still very fast and work great for a lot of different purposes, but i7 is what I'd consider my go-to, and I think it's worth that extra $100 if you're a serious designer. As far as a video card here, I just picked a middle-of-the-road one. This particular one is made by AMD. If you have a little bit more money, I'd look into some of the NVIDIA offerings, but when it comes to just bang for your buck, in the middle-of-the-range kind of price, this is a very hard card to beat. This is an R9 280. And it's at $175. So this comes in really handy if you're ripping stuff like video or doing really complex Photoshop work. It'll actually pull in your video card and help it take on some of that processing brunt. Also, if you happen to be a gamer, this is a very good card for gaming. And the video card area is one where you can either spend less or more money depending on what you want to do. If you are a big gamer or you're very heavy into 3D editing or video processing, I might recommend spending a little bit more money and getting one of the new NVIDIA 970s or even a 980 if you're really heavy into stuff like video editing. But I think this card for the price is a really good workhorse for a system that'll have quite a bit of longevity. RAM right here, it looks a little bit funky because it's gaming RAM. These little spikes on it are just to help dissipate heat, but it's 16 gigs of RAM, which should be good enough for most designers. If you do a ton of video editing in something like Premiere or you do lots of 3D work, I'd really recommend bumping the 16 gigs up to 32 gigs, which will cost you roughly double this $165 price tag. And something to note here, price in a RAM is extremely variable. The price of it will change a whole lot, even over a few weeks period, depending on what the supply is like. So kind of keep your eye out there for good deals as they come along. But I'd recommend for anyone that's a serious designer, a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM is really what you're looking to get. Most Adobe programs will soak up as much RAM as you throw at them, so having at least 16 is very nice. If you're working on something like 4 or 8 gigs of RAM and you jump up to 16, the difference will be pretty significant. It'll be something you'll definitely notice, and it's not really an area where I'd recommend trying to scrimp money from. It's just worth the price to buy 16 up front. Next up is the hard drive, and right here I have a 250 gig solid state. If you have some more money, they have a 500 gigabyte solid state for about $80 more, which is a really fantastic deal. This particular one is a Samsung 840. I use a 250 gig in my system right now, and once you have your computer running on a solid state drive, I don't think you'll ever want to go back to a traditional hard drive. It is just that much faster. It is one of the biggest parts, in my opinion, that will make a computer just feel so much faster. When you load all your programs off of it and you have all your drivers, etc., loading off a really fast solid state drive, your computer just flies in comparison, even to a really fast traditional spinning hard drive. So if you save even a few seconds every time you load up a program like Photoshop or Illustrator, over the course of a year that really adds up, as well as boot time. Solid state drives will cause your computer to boot up significantly quicker than a standard hard drive, and I'm personally a huge fan of time savings however I can do it. And this is just a really cheap way to give your computer a lot more speed. So on this build, I picked the 250. If you have a little bit more money laying around, I'd suggest the 500 like I said before. The 250 on my system is getting full pretty quick, and I kind of wish I bought something a little bit bigger, but the 250 is working just fine for me right now. And to help with the problem of actual space, since solid state drives are still a little bit smaller, and if you want to get a terabyte, for example, it's $349, which actually that's pretty cheap compared to what it used to be. It used to be about $500, but it's a lot more expensive than a traditional drive. So right on this next page, I have a traditional 2 terabyte drive. So you can load up all your programs, you can load up Windows, anything you need to load really fast, have it running on this solid state drive, and then any long-term storage like pictures or movies, working files, you can move off of that really fast moving solid state drive and bring onto this standard 2 terabyte hard drive. And this is a 7200 RPM hard drive, which is nice and fast. The Western Digital Black Series is, in my opinion, one of the best series you can get. As far as a standard hard drive goes, I think 2 terabytes will be plenty big enough for most people. The 2 terabytes, $140. If I check out 3 terabytes, It's $189, so you can decide how big you want this hard drive to be. I go between 2 and 3, and that'll give you a lot of space for the future. And since you are building your own PC at any time, you could just add in another hard drive if you find yourself running out of space. It's one of the huge perks of building your own PC versus working with a Mac that you really can't upgrade, although on the Mac you could buy an external hard drive, which is a nice solution for them. So next up here we have the monitor, and since I'm comparing this computer to a 27-inch iMac, which has a beautiful screen, the 27-inch iMac screens are 1440p, so I really wanted to show a 1440p computer monitor just to be an apples to apples comparison instead of showing a 1080p resolution monitor that will be a lot cheaper, but it won't look as crisp and as clear as that Apple display. So this is a 1440p display monitor. It is what I use at home, and I can tell you it is a very beautiful monitor. It is not as glossy as the iMac monitor, but I actually think that's a good thing. It does a good job of eliminating light reflections from your screen. If you've ever worked on an iMac monitor in a very bright or sunny place, you know that it's very common to see lots of reflections in that screen, where this has a matte screen where you really don't see those reflections as bad, which I think for graphics editing is something that you really want. So this is definitely not a cheap monitor at $470. It's a fairly significant expense, so you can save a lot of money if you're willing to work on a 1080p screen, but I will say if you do have the money to go for a 1440p screen monitor, I really would suggest doing that. It's just much sharper and much clearer, particularly when you're working in something like vector or fine type. You can see the pixels much better. It just looks a lot better, and it gives you a little bit more real estate on your screen to work from. So in my opinion, this is a fantastic monitor. Since I bought it, I just did some color correction work, and once I did that, this is now my go-to monitor for everything I do, and I don't think I'd ever go back to 1080p after going 1440p. And here's just a basic thing that you'll need. It's a Windows 8.1 disk. It's about $92. If you absolutely hate Windows 8, you could buy a Windows 7 disk instead. Personally, I really don't mind Windows 8 all that much, but this is really just on there in case you don't have another operating system laying around and you need to buy one. I wanted to make sure the price of the actual system build reflected that. So next up here, this is one where you could spend a whole lot more money if you want to. It's just a very cheap Logitech wireless keyboard and mouse combination. Logitech is really my go-to brand when it comes to stuff like keyboards or mice. They do a great job of providing very high quality parts for a very reasonable price. So this one's just $24, which is pretty crazy. If you do have more money, I would suggest going ahead and buying these separate. A really nice mouse will run you maybe $50 to $70, and a really nice keyboard anywhere from $50 to $90. It kind of depends on what you're trying to do. I sort of assumed anyone watching this video will have a mouse and keyboard already, but if you don't, this is a nice cheap way to get into it. And if you want to spend some more money, I'd look into the higher end offerings that Logitech has to offer. And last up here, I threw in a Blu-ray drive. You actually don't need a Blu-ray drive at all if you're willing to install the Windows installation from a download or a thumb drive. But in case you want the flexibility of having this, or you want to watch Blu-ray movies on your computer, this is something that's really nice to have just for that reason. $60 won't break the bank for most people. So I threw one on my personal build just in case I ever run into a disc where I need to put the disc in. I can't find the driver online. I have that option. And I can also watch movies on my computer if I ever want to do so. So right here is the entire listing of parts that I picked. There's quite a few of them at 12, but if I go up to the top here and just hit want the entire list, the overall price of this is $1787.03 versus this Apple computer, which is $2749. Now, of course, you'll have to build this computer yourself. I don't think this computer will look as nice as the Apple, but it will give you the added bonuses of being able to be upgraded at any time. You can swap parts in or out, which on an Apple is a bit more of a headache, that's for sure. And also this particular build, I prefer a solid state drive versus a fusion drive. And a fusion drive is basically a combination solid state drive and traditional hard drive, where it uses a solid state drive to move around the information that needs to move quickly all the time, and then it puts it on the slower moving spinning hard drive when it's not in use. But if you have a dedicated solid state drive, it'll always be using the fastest drive possible for any information that you choose to put on it. So that's in my opinion, a better way of going about it, and that way you can just manually move information that you're not using or long-term storage information into that other hard drive that I stuck on this list, that big old 2 terabyte drive. Or you could also put it on an external. If you already have an external, you could just not buy this 2 terabyte hard drive and save a little bit of money on your build that way. But that's really it for this video. I will link all these different parts in the description. And like I said before, if you're not familiar with building your own PC, maybe you have a friend who is, that's willing to help you out. Or you can check out some other videos online. If you just Google how to build your own PC, there's a ton of really good information out there from various tech sources that'll do a step-by-step guide of how to go through and build your own PC. I've been building my own PCs for about 15 years now, which makes me feel kind of old, but it's gotten so much easier than it has been in the past to really just plug and play parts together. It doesn't take that long. If you've never done it before and you're doing it on your own, I'd estimate 2 to 3 hours of your own time to go through and really try to get everything working properly. But like I said before, this is a totally different video than the type of stuff I normally put on my channel, so do leave comments about what you think about this kind of stuff. I just thought it'd be kind of interesting to let people know that if you don't want to go out and spend the money on an absolutely premium Apple offering, there are other options out there, and one of those other options is to build your own PC. It's what I've been doing at home for a very long time. It helps me save money as well as gives me the option to upgrade whenever I want to. And as a person who's just a big old tech nerd, I love being able to go into a PC, switch parts around, and just increase the performance. Once you get into it, it gives you a whole lot of flexibility in terms of the technology that helps you create things. But that's it for now, and do remember to leave comments or suggestions below, and I really appreciate you watching this video. And if you did like this video, please like and favorite. And if you want to see more stuff like this or other design related stuff, be sure to subscribe. I do design related content like this every week. Thanks for watching.